This week, the European Drought Observatory, operated by the European Commission's Joint Research Centre, flagged drought conditions worsening across Europe in early June, while Santorini winemakers reported Assyrtiko output down by roughly 8%. One signal would be unusual. Several signals together are harder to dismiss. The drought monitor is showing stress across parts of Europe. Reuters reported that Santorini's grape production fell from about 2,500 metric tons to about 500 metric tons after years of heat and low rainfall. A 90-year-old Kulura vine has already died. And on the same island, tourism keeps pulling water through hotels, kitchens, pools, laundries, and showers at the hottest point of the year. But that is not the most dangerous part. The headline is not only a dead vine or a smaller harvest. The hidden number is water demand arriving at the exact moment the land has the least spare moisture. This is not just a drought. This is a tourism water fuse inside a dry farmed island. So the question is no longer simply whether Santorini can save its famous wine. The question is, what happens when drought reaches the root, the worker, the winery, the desalination plant, the hotel room, and the island's water system at the same time? Like, subscribe, and comment where you are watching from. Because this island is not only showing a vineyard crisis, it is showing where the next water margin may fail first. At the start of this week, the first signal does not come from a vineyard. It comes from a drought dashboard. The European Drought Observatory, operated through the European Commission's Joint Research Centre and Copernicus Emergency Systems, reported that drought conditions worsened in Europe in early June. That sentence sounds administrative. It sounds like something meant for analysts, not for a farmer bending over a vine basket on a volcanic island. But on Santorini, that kind of sentence is not abstract. It is the first light on the board. The board has several lights now. One light is meteorological. Less rain has arrived than the land expected. One light is agricultural. Soil moisture is not where it should be. One light is biological. Vegetation begins showing stress after the missing rain has already moved through the ground. And one light is economic. The island's most famous grape has already been pulled into the damage. At first glance, these could look like separate stories. A European drought report, a wine harvest problem, a tourism pressure problem, a water supply issue on a Greek island. But when the same date is placed across all four, the picture changes. On their own, these signals could be treated separately. Together, they describe one larger configuration. The day begins with a map. Not a tourist map of white houses, blue domes, and narrow lanes above the caldera. Not a postcard map, an operational map. A map built from rainfall, soil moisture, satellite observations, vegetation stress, and drought categories. On that map, drought is not just an opinion from someone who thinks the summer feels dry. It is a measured condition moving through the system. According to the European Drought Observatory, the combined drought indicator uses several layers to classify drought pressure. First, it looks for a shortage of rainfall. Then, it looks at soil moisture. Then, it looks at whether vegetation is showing stress. That order matters. It means the system does not begin with a dead plant. It begins earlier, when the sky fails to refill the ground. Then the soil starts losing its reserve. Then the plant becomes the evidence. By the time the vine looks dead, the dashboard has been warning for a while. That is what makes the Santorini story different from a normal bad harvest. A bad harvest can be a season. A vineyard disease can be a local outbreak. A hailstorm can hit one slope and miss another. But the signal now is broader. It is not only the vine. It is the atmospheric pattern above it, the dry volcanic soil below it, the water demand beside it, and the island economy built around it. The map shows drought, but the system is being tested at the water margin. Santorini is a small island carrying a large identity. Official municipal data lists a permanent population of about 15,550 people. That is, the resident island. The island with schools, clinics, roads, houses, pipes, waste systems, workers, farmers, elderly residents, and children. But Santorini also has another island layered on top of it, the tourist island. Reuters has reported that Santorini received about 3.4 million visitors in a recent year, a number that local officials have connected to pressure on infrastructure and daily life. That number is not just a crowd number, it is a water number, it is a laundry number, it is a toilet flush number, it is a shower number, it is a restaurant kitchen number, it is a swimming pool number, it is a desalination number. And this is the detail that changes the dashboard. The vines need relief during a dry stretch. Residents need reliable drinking water. Hotels need service continuity. Restaurants need kitchens running. Cruise visitors need the island to function for a few hours. Winemakers need grapes to survive not just one hot afternoon, but years of repeated stress. All of this demand lands on the same island, at the same time, under the same sky. This is not just a drought. This is a tourism water fuse inside a dry farmed island. By late morning in the operational story, another data stream appears. Reuters reports that production of Santorini's famous Assyrtiko grape fell from about 2,500 metric tons in 2022 to about 500 metric tons last year. That is the kind of number that should stop the room. 500 metric tons still sounds large until it is placed beside what came before it. The island did not lose a small fraction. It lost most of the reported production. It went from a harvest that could support a known wine economy to a harvest that forces wineries, growers, and buyers into a different relationship with scarcity. Then comes the detail that makes the statistic feel physical. A 90-year-old vine trained in the traditional couloura basket shape has died. That single vine is not the whole story, but it is the symbol that makes the data visible. A vine like that is not a seasonal machine. It is not planted in spring and replaced in autumn. It is a living structure shaped over decades by wind, soil, pruning, heat, and human hands. It was trained low to the ground to survive the Aegean wind. It was formed into a basket to protect grapes from the island's harsh conditions. It belonged to a farming system that learned to live with scarcity long before modern tourists arrived by the millions. So when one of those vines dies, the question is not only what happened this year. The question is, what changed around a system that had already been designed for difficulty? That is the strange part. Santorini's vineyards were never fragile in the simple sense. They were built in a hard place. The island is volcanic. The soil is dry. Rainfall is limited. Winds can be punishing. The old vine baskets are not decorative. They are survival architecture. They are a farmer's answer to an extreme landscape. But old adaptation can be overwhelmed by a new combination. A plant can survive wind. It can survive poor soil. It can survive a dry summer if winter has filled enough of the ground. It can survive tourism nearby if water systems have margin. The danger is when these pressures stack: low rainfall, high heat, depleted soil moisture, peak visitors, expensive water, stressed growers, more demand for hotels and services, less recovery time between seasons. One signal would be unusual. Several signals together are harder to dismiss. By noon, the dashboard is no longer only about weather. It is about load. A weather system creates load on the land. Tourism creates load on water. Drought creates load on agriculture. Heat creates load on workers. Scarcity creates load on prices. Desalination creates load on energy. Wastewater reuse creates load on treatment systems. Every one of these loads may be manageable alone. The operational question is what happens when they arrive together. That is why the phrase water demand matters more than it first appears. Water demand does not move like a headline. It moves through pipes, pumps, tanks, bills, maintenance schedules, hotel occupancy, restaurant bookings, and planting decisions. It hides inside normal activity. A guest takes a shower. A kitchen washes plates. A pool loses water to evaporation. A hotel launders sheets. A worker cleans a room. A ferry arrives. A cruise ship unloads. A winery waits for grapes. A farmer checks soil that has nothing left to give. No single action looks dramatic. The total becomes the event. According to EEA grants reporting on water management in Greece, securing drinking water is one of the important problems in insular Greece, and Santorini is an illustrative example because desalination units expanded there due to tourism development. That sentence is not emotional, but it is operationally important. It means the water system has already been adjusted around tourism growth. Desalination is no longer a backup detail. It becomes part of the island's basic ability to function, and desalination has its own margin. It needs energy. It needs maintenance. It needs intake systems. It needs membranes. It needs distribution. It produces water, but not without cost, timing, and vulnerability. When the island is calm, that system can seem invisible. People turn a tap, and water arrives. But drought changes what the tap represents. It is no longer just convenience. It is a connection to a plant, a grid, a pipe, a storage tank, and a planning assumption about how much demand the island can carry. The day becomes abnormal because the old categories stop staying in their lanes. The drought office is not talking about hotel rooms. The winery is not designed to manage cruise arrivals. The farmer is not responsible for desalination capacity. The tourist may never see the vineyard. The hotel may not see the soil moisture map, but the island connects them anyway. That connection is the story. By afternoon, the heat is no longer only outside. It is inside work. It is inside timing. Vineyard labor has to happen under harsher conditions. Grapes do not wait for a cooler week because a schedule is more convenient. A dry vine does not pause its stress because a hotel is full. A water system does not get to choose whether visitors arrive on the same day the land needs relief. The system is being asked to do two things at once. It must host the tourist economy that keeps much of the island financially alive, and it must protect the agricultural identity that makes Santorini more than a crowded cliffside destination. The island sells a view, but it also sells a landscape. It sells wine from vines that look almost impossible. It sells continuity. Drought attacks continuity. That is why the numbers feel so different when placed side by side. About 15,550 permanent residents. About 3.4 million visitors in a recent year. Assyrtiko production down from about 2,500 metric tons to about 500 metric tons. Grapes reported at prices around €10 per kilogram. Desalination expanded because tourism development increased drinking water demand. Individually, each number can be explained. Together, they form the day. A small island is carrying a big seasonal surge. A dry farmed crop is losing the moisture base that made dry farming possible. A water system is leaning harder on desalination. A tourism economy is pulling water during the exact season when heat and drought tighten the ground. And a wine tradition built over generations is being forced to adapt faster than a 90-year-old vine can grow. But the operational dashboard still has one more light. It is the light that does not flash until people start arguing over what the crisis is called. Some will call it climate change. Some will call it over-tourism. Some will call it bad water planning. Some will call it agricultural decline. Some will call it the price of success. Each label catches part of the truth. None of them alone is enough. The day is abnormal because Santorini is not facing one stress. It is facing a compound load. The visible event is a vineyard under drought. The deeper event is a dry island economy discovering that water, land, tourism, energy, and agriculture are not separate files. They are one system with one margin. And once that margin starts shrinking, the first signs may not look like collapse. They may look like higher grape prices, shorter harvests, more desalination units, more debate over cruise caps, more pressure on wastewater reuse, more farmers wondering whether old vines can survive another season, more hotels competing for the same invisible resource, more official maps showing drought before the damage becomes obvious. That is the part worth holding on to. An official drought signal is not the disaster itself. A dead vine is not the whole island. A tourist shower is not the sole cause. A smaller harvest is not the end of Santorini wine. But when all of them appear in the same frame, the story changes from a weather problem into a system test. The forecast shows dry conditions. The vineyard receives stress. The hotel receives guests. The desalination plant receives demand. The farmer receives uncertainty. The island receives the bill. And this is where the next question begins. If the headline number is the collapse in grape production, what is the hidden number underneath it? What number is moving quietly through hotel rooms, pipes, pumps, vineyards, and dry volcanic soil before anyone sees the next dead vine? That number is water demand, and in Santorini, it may be the fuse. The first number that stops the room is not the age of the vine, it is the size of the fall. According to Reuters reporting from Santorini, production of the island's famous Assyrtiko grape fell from about 2,500 metric tons in 2022 to about 500 metric tons last year. That is the headline number, and it is easy to hear it as an agricultural statistic, the kind of number that belongs in a trade report or a winery meeting. But this number is bigger than a harvest. It is a season being pulled out of position. A metric ton is 1,000 kilograms, a little more than 2,200 pounds. So 2,500 metric tons is roughly 2.5 million kilograms of grapes, or about 5.5 million pounds. 500 metric tons is roughly 500,000 kilograms, or about 1.1 million pounds. In plain terms, the island did not lose a little production. It lost about 4/5 of the reported Assyrtiko grape supply. That is not a bad year sitting quietly inside a normal range. That is a vineyard system moving from abundance to scarcity, fast enough that every person downstream can feel the shift. The farmer feels it first as empty clusters. The winery feels it as missing fruit. The buyer feels it as a price shock. The island feels it as a warning that one of its oldest forms of resilience is no longer behaving like it used to. But here is the part that makes the number strange. Santorini's vineyards are not supposed to be delicate. They are famous because they already grow in a hard place. The vines sit low to the ground. Many are trained into kulura baskets, circular forms that protect grapes from wind and harsh sunlight. The soil is volcanic. The landscape is exposed. Rainfall has always been limited. The entire system carries the memory of dryness. It was not designed for comfort. It was designed for endurance. So when production falls from 2,500 metric tons to 500 metric tons, the question is not simply why a crop failed. The question is, what kind of pressure can overwhelm a crop that was already built for pressure? The number is not just grapes. It is an old adaptation being pushed beyond its working range. Think about what an 80% collapse means in physical space. It means rows where vines still stand, but fruit does not arrive in the same way. It means the baskets are still visible, but the harvest inside them is thinner. It means a winery that once expected a certain volume now has to compete for a much smaller pool. It means contracts, bottling plans, export expectations, restaurant lists, seller decisions, and cash flow all begin to tighten around a missing harvest. The loss is not only in the vineyard, it travels. A grape is picked once, but the absence of that grape is counted many times. It is counted by the grower who sells less. It is counted by the winemaker who pays more. It is counted by the restaurant that receives fewer bottles. It is counted by the visitor who still expects Santorini to taste like Santorini. The headline number becomes an economic pressure wave. Reuters reported that winemakers have been paying farmers around €10 per kilogram for grapes, a price compared to levels seen in prosperous regions such as Champagne, while in northern Greece, where conditions are less hot, a kilogram can go for around 80 cents. That comparison is not just about price, it is about geography. It shows what happens when climate, scarcity, and reputation meet in one small island market. €10 per kilogram turns the grape from an ingredient into a contested resource. It means each cluster carries more financial weight. It means every missing kilogram is not just a lower yield, but a higher negotiation. It means scarcity has entered the business model. And once scarcity enters the business model, the vineyard is no longer only an agricultural system. It becomes a stress test for the island economy. But numbers can deceive if they stay too clean. 2,500 to 500 sounds precise and distant. So bring it closer. Imagine a winery that expected 5 truckloads of grapes, and now sees only one. Imagine a cellar built around normal production, but the fruit arrives as if 4 trucks vanished before harvest. Imagine workers preparing equipment, barrels, tanks, labels, buyers, and schedules, while the land answers with only a fraction of what the operation was built to receive. That is what the headline number means, outside the spreadsheet. It is not only lower volume, it is a planning failure imposed by the weather. The number is not just temperature, rainfall, or grapes. It is time being pulled out from under an industry that depends on seasonal trust. Farming is built around trust in the calendar. Winter is supposed to bring enough rain to recharge the ground. Spring is supposed to carry vines into growth. Summer is supposed to stress the plant, but not erase the reserve beneath it. Harvest is supposed to arrive after months of work. When that sequence breaks, the damage does not wait until the official yield is announced. It begins earlier, when the vine enters the season with less stored water, when heat arrives before the plant can recover, when fruit formation is reduced, when the farmer walks the vineyard and sees the year becoming smaller before it is counted. That is why this collapse is so important by season. A vine is not like a factory that can add another shift after a bad week. It cannot make up for missing winter moisture in one afternoon. It cannot replace decades of root development with one emergency decision. It cannot grow a 90-year-old trunk again before the next tourist season. The vineyard has memory, but it does not have infinite speed. And this is where the headline number becomes a warning about thresholds. A normal bad year can be absorbed if the next year restores the system. A small reduction can be managed if reserves remain. A price increase can be tolerated if buyers still believe the product has continuity. But an 80% fall changes the shape of expectation. It tells growers that the old range may no longer be reliable. It tells wineries that scarcity may not be a temporary inconvenience. It tells the island that the famous landscape people come to see may be carrying more stress than the postcard admits. The map shows Santorini as a destination. The number shows Santorini as a system losing margin. There is another reason the number hits harder on this island. Assyrtiko is not just any grape in any field. It is part of Santorini's identity. It connects geology, agriculture, tourism, cuisine, and export reputation. Visitors do not only come to see the caldera, many come to taste the island, and Assyrtiko is one of the ways the island turns volcanic soil into culture. When production collapses, the loss is not only measured in wine bottles, it touches the story the island tells about itself. A vineyard can be a working landscape, a climate archive, a tourist attraction, an employer, a family inheritance, and a land use barrier all at once. If that vineyard weakens, several systems feel it. The land may be more attractive for development. Farmers may leave cultivation. Wineries may depend more heavily on fewer growers. Prices may rise beyond what some markets accept. The island may keep the image of wine while losing the agricultural base that made the image real. But that is not the part most people see. Most visitors see a glass, a view, a label, a sunset. They do not see a production curve falling from 2,500 metric tons to 500. They do not see the missing winter rain inside the price. They do not see the heat inside the root zone. They do not see the farmer choosing whether to continue cultivating a vineyard that needs more labor, more adaptation, and more uncertainty every year. The visible number makes the headline. The hidden pressure decides whether the headline repeats. The ordinary comparison is this. If a household lost 80% of its income in a year, no one would call it a minor adjustment. If a reservoir lost 80% of its available supply, officials would not call it a small shortage. If a hospital lost 80% of its beds, the whole region would feel the emergency. Yet when a vineyard loses that share of production, the language can become softer, because agriculture is often treated as something that bends quietly until it breaks. But farms are infrastructure too. They convert climate into food, income, identity, and continuity. A vineyard is not a decorative background behind tourism. It is a slow machine made of roots, soil, labor, and time. When its output drops by 4/5, the machine is not simply underperforming, it is sending a warning from underground. The timing matters. The reduction did not happen on an empty island. It happened on a place where water demand rises sharply during the warm months. When millions of visitors arrive across the islands of Greece and local systems must serve residents, hotels, restaurants, pools, ferry traffic, and seasonal labor, Reuters described farmers, hotel owners, and swimming pool operators competing for shares of a dwindling water supply during the warmer months on islands like Santorini. That detail puts the grape number inside a wider frame. The crop is not failing in isolation. It is failing in a landscape where every liter has more than one claim on it. This is why 500 metric tons is not merely the new yield. It is a signal that the water budget has become contested. Not all of that contest is direct irrigation, because Santorini's old vineyards have traditionally been dry farmed. The deeper issue is that dry farming depends on the land receiving and holding enough moisture before the dry season tightens. When rainfall weakens and heat increases, the farm has less natural reserve. When tourism expands, the island's engineered water system must carry more of the overall human demand. When adaptation requires treated wastewater, desalinated water, underground irrigation, or new planting patterns, the vineyard is pulled into the same water politics as the hotels. The old system survived by needing little. The new system may survive only by competing intelligently, and that is a major change. The number is not just a fall from 2,500 to 500. It is a movement from inherited resilience to managed survival. It tells us that traditions built for a dry climate can still be overwhelmed by a hotter, drier, more crowded version of that climate. It tells us that adaptation is no longer a future conversation. It is already in the vineyard, in the winery, in the water plant, and in the price of 1 kilogram of grapes. The question becomes sharper with every conversion. 2.5 million kilograms, down to 500,000. 5.5 million pounds, down to 1.1 million. 10 euros per kilogram, on an island where water is becoming more contested. A 90-year-old vine dead in a system known for endurance. These are not separate facts, they are parts of one operational message. The island is still functioning, the wineries are still trying, the tourists are still arriving. The bottles still exist, but the margin under the story has narrowed. And once a margin narrows, the next stress does not need to be historic to become dangerous. It only needs to arrive before the system has recovered. That is the real meaning of the headline number. It is not a final verdict on Santorini wine. It is not proof that every vine will die. It is not a simple accusation against tourism or one bad season. The warning does not need exaggeration. The number is already enough. A crop that helped define an island has lost most of its reported production in a few years of heat and low rainfall, while water demand keeps rising around it. The headline is the 80% collapse. The real story is the shrinking space between what the island wants to be and what its water system can support. And beneath that space lies the number we have not fully counted yet. Not the grapes harvested, but the liters demanded. Not the wine missing this year, but the water margin that decides whether next year can recover. The number everyone can see is the harvest. The number that decides the damage is water. That is the turn in the Santorini story. A dead 90-year-old vine is visible. A harvest falling from about 2,500 metric tons to about 500 metric tons is visible. A grape price climbing toward 10 euros per kilogram is visible. These are the numbers that make the headline, because they can be photographed, counted, sold, and compared. But they are not the deepest number. They are the surface expression of something moving underneath the island. The visible number makes the headline. The hidden number writes the damage. On Santorini, the hidden number is seasonal water demand, not annual water demand, not average water demand, not the amount used on a quiet winter day when the island belongs mostly to residents. The dangerous number is the amount of water the island must produce, move, store, and protect when drought, heat, tourism, hotels, restaurants, pools, laundry, agriculture, and daily life all peak in the same season. That is why the crop collapse cannot be understood only as a vineyard story. The vines are not dying in an empty landscape. They are dying on an island where millions of visitors arrive around the same warm season, when the land is driest, the air is hotter, and every system has less room for error. This is not just a drought. This is a tourism water fuse inside a dry farmed island. The first mistake is to look only at rainfall. Rainfall is essential. Without enough winter and spring rain, Santorini's dry farmed vines enter the hot season with a thinner reserve. The soil begins the year with less stored moisture. The roots search a smaller bank. The grapes develop under more stress. Heat then pulls more water from leaves, soil, and fruit. That is the meteorological and agricultural story. But rainfall alone does not explain the full island load. A drought reduces supply from the sky. Tourism increases demand on the ground. Between those two forces sits the water system, and that system has to answer both sides at once. According to EEA grants, reporting on water management in Greece, securing drinking water is one of the important challenges for the country's islands. Santorini is used as an example because desalination units expanded there in connection with tourism development. That one operational fact matters because it tells us something simple and severe. The island already needed engineered water to keep up with human demand. The natural water balance was no longer enough. Now place drought on top of that. The tourist does not arrive as a villain. That would be too easy, and it would be false. A visitor arrives as a person who needs what every person needs: water to drink, water to shower, water for a room to be cleaned, water for food preparation, water for toilets, water for laundry, water for pools and terraces, and the comfort that tourism markets as normal. None of those actions, by itself, explains a dead vine. But systems do not break only from one dramatic action. They often break from normal actions, repeated at the wrong scale, in the wrong season, against a shrinking margin. That is the hidden mechanism behind the hidden number. A permanent population of around 15,500 people lives on the island. A tourism economy can bring millions of visitors through the same landscape over a year. The difference between those two numbers is not just social, it is hydraulic. The resident island needs one water system. The tourist island, layered on top of it, needs another scale of service. But the pipes, the power, the desalination units, the storage, the wastewater treatment, the roads, and the land all belong to the same physical island. The map shows a destination. The system receives a load. And this is where the hidden number changes the risk. If Santorini were only dry, the answer might be agricultural adaptation. If Santorini were only crowded, the answer might be tourism management. If Santorini only had water supply problems, the answer might be more desalination or better distribution. But the abnormal pattern is that these pressures are not staying separate. Low rainfall pushes the vineyard. Heat pushes the vine. Tourism pushes the water system. Desalination pushes the energy system. Wastewater reuse pushes treatment quality and public trust. Higher grape prices push wineries and farmers. Land values push agriculture toward retreat. And all of it arrives on an island whose most famous vineyard tradition was built for dryness, not for dryness, plus mass seasonal demand, plus a warming Mediterranean baseline. The headline is crop loss. The real story is water timing. Timing is the part that gets missed. An island can sometimes survive high demand if supply has been recharged. A vineyard can sometimes survive a harsh summer if winter has soaked the ground. A desalination plant can sometimes cover growth if energy, maintenance, and distribution have enough margin. A farmer can sometimes survive a bad year if the next year restores production. The danger is when the recovery window closes. If winter rains are weak, spring begins with deficit. If summer arrives hot, the deficit deepens. If tourists arrive in large numbers at the same time, engineered water demand rises. If growers begin needing treated wastewater or desalinated water for adaptation, agriculture enters the same competition that hotels already understand. If the next season begins before the last deficit has healed, The island stops moving through drought as an event. It starts living inside drought as a condition. That is why the hidden number is not just liters. It is the ratio between demand and recovery. A liter used in a wet year is not the same as a liter used during a drought. A shower during a normal season is not the same operational signal as a shower when desalination plants are already central to supply. A swimming pool in a water-rich place is not the same as a swimming pool on a volcanic island where dry-farmed vines are losing their reserve. The action may look identical. The system context changes its meaning. The event is visible outside. The damage begins inside the margin. Reuters reported that in warmer months, when millions of tourists descend on islands like Santorini, farmers, hotel owners, and swimming pool operators often compete for a share of a dwindling water supply. That sentence identifies the real arena, not a dramatic battlefield, not a single broken pipe, a competition among normal needs and profitable uses, all claiming water when water is least forgiving. The vine is part of that competition, even when it is not directly irrigated. That seems contradictory at first. Santorini's old vineyards are famous for dry farming. If they are dry farmed, why does tourism water demand matter? The answer is that dry farming is not the absence of water. It is a dependence on water that arrives naturally, is stored quietly, and is used slowly by the plant. It depends on winter rain, soil behavior, dew, humidity, root depth, canopy management, and timing. Dry farming is not magic. It is a contract with the local climate. When the climate changes the contract, the farmer needs options. Those options may include treated wastewater. They may include subsurface irrigation. They may include row reconfiguration. They may include atmospheric water harvesting. They may include new training systems that reduce evaporation. But every adaptation has a cost, a source, an infrastructure requirement, or a social decision attached to it. Once a dry-farmed vineyard needs engineered help, it steps into the island's broader water system. That is the fuse. Tourism water demand does not have to be the original cause of the drought to intensify the risk created by drought. It only has to reduce the available margin at the moment the island needs margin most. It only has to make every adaptation harder, more expensive, more political, or more energy dependent. It only has to turn a climate problem into an allocation problem. This is the difference between cause and fuse. The cause is not one hotel shower. The cause is not one pool. The cause is not one cruise visitor. The cause includes heat, low rainfall, hotter summers, erratic precipitation, land use pressure, farming economics, and the changing Mediterranean climate. But the fuse is the demand that runs through the system during the dry season, tightening every choice before the next stress arrives. A fuse does not create the explosive material, it connects the spark to it. The hidden number also changes who is affected first. The first person may be a farmer with old vines, and no easy way to replace time. The first business may be a winery trying to secure grapes at prices that no longer resemble normal Greek agricultural markets. The first infrastructure operator may be a water manager, watching desalination become less of a supplement and more of a backbone. The first resident may be someone who sees the island become more expensive, while basic services carry seasonal pressure. The first worker may be someone cleaning rooms, washing linens, or serving tables in the very economy that is increasing demand. And the tourist may not notice anything at first. That is what makes water risk so deceptive. If the system still works, the visitor experiences continuity. The tap runs. The view remains beautiful. The wine is poured. The pool is blue. The restaurant opens. The sunset comes exactly as promised. But behind that continuity, the island may be spending down resilience. It may be using more energy to make water. It may be stretching wastewater treatment into a new role. It may be asking farmers to adapt faster than their margins allow. It may be turning old vineyards into expensive relics instead of living production systems. The hidden number is quiet until it is not. A drought dashboard can show precipitation deficits. A harvest report can show grape losses. A tourism office can show visitor numbers. A water utility can show production volumes, but the real story is the overlap. How much water is demanded when the soil is driest? How much desalination capacity exists when hotel occupancy peaks? How much treated wastewater can safely reach vineyards when growers need it? How much energy is required to make that water? How much of the old agricultural landscape can remain when the island economy rewards buildings more quickly than vines? Those questions do not fit neatly into one headline, but they decide the future more than the headline does. The visible number says, Assyrtiko fell by about 80%. The hidden number asks whether the system can recover before the next dry season. The visible number says, a 90-year-old vine died. The hidden number asks how many years of moisture stress had already passed through its roots. The visible number says grapes cost around €10 per kilogram. The hidden number asks how much scarcity has now been priced into the island's identity. That is why the fourth part of this story has to move away from the vineyard. Even though the vineyard remains at the center, the vineyard is the warning light. The water system is the circuit behind it. A warning light can be replaced, ignored, or explained away, but if the circuit is overloaded, more lights will come on. Some may appear in agriculture, some may appear in drinking water, some may appear in energy demand, some may appear in land use, some may appear in the price of a bottle, some may appear in the decision of a young farmer who chooses not to continue. The headline number tells us what has already happened. The hidden number tells us what may happen next, and that hidden number is not sitting in one field. It is moving through the island every day, from the hotel room into the laundry, from the laundry into the wastewater stream, from the wastewater stream into the treatment plant, from the treatment plant toward a possible vineyard pipe, from the desalination unit into the electric load, from the electric load into the cost of water, from the cost of water into the farmer's decision, from the farmer's decision into the future of the vine. That is the path most people never see. A drought becomes a harvest collapse. A harvest collapse becomes a price signal. A price signal becomes an adaptation demand. An adaptation demand becomes an infrastructure question. An infrastructure question becomes a political choice about what the island is for. Is Santorini only a place to host visitors? Is it also a place where old vines still have a future? Can it be both if water demand keeps peaking when the land is least able to recover? And if it can be both, what must change before the next 90-year-old vine turns from adaptation into evidence? That is where the hidden number leaves the dashboard and enters the mechanism. Because water demand is not just counted at the tap, it begins above the island, in the failed rain. It moves into volcanic soil. It passes through the root zone. It meets the vine. Then it meets the hotel, the desalination plant, the treatment facility, the electric grid, the farmer, the worker, and the bottle. By the time the vine dies, the system has already been carrying load. The mechanism begins before the vine looks sick. That is the first thing to understand. A dead Calora vine is the final image, not the first event. By the time a 90-year-old vine turns dry enough for a winemaker to point at it as evidence, the process has already moved through the sky, the soil, the root system, the leaf, the grape, the farmer, and the water infrastructure around the vineyard. The mechanism has a simple name: agricultural drought. But agricultural drought is not just a lack of rain, it is a sequence. It begins when precipitation does not arrive in the amount or timing the land expects. Then the soil moisture reserve shrinks. Then the plant begins to lose access to water in the root zone. Then vegetation stress appears from above as a satellite signal and from below as a farmer's observation. The plant does not announce the problem at the beginning. It announces the problem after the hidden stages have already happened. According to the European Drought Observatory, drought monitoring looks at several parts of the hydrological cycle and impact chain, including precipitation, soil moisture, and vegetation stress. The combined drought indicator is important because it does not treat drought as one flat condition. It recognizes stages. A watch level can appear when there is a relevant shortage of precipitation. A warning level can appear when that shortage comes with soil moisture anomaly. An alert level can appear when the rainfall deficit and soil moisture deficit are accompanied by vegetation stress. That sequence is the mechanism in miniature. Sky fails, soil empties, plant reacts. By the time the public sees damage, the system is already carrying load. On Santorini, this sequence enters a very specific landscape. The island is not a green valley with deep rivers running through it. It is volcanic, windy, dry, exposed, and shaped by centuries of agricultural improvisation. Its vineyards became famous because farmers learned to train vines low to the ground, often in the circular basket form known as couloura. That shape is not nostalgia, it is engineering. It protects fruit from harsh wind and sun. It keeps the vine close to the soil surface. It turns a plant into a small shelter for its own grapes. The basket is a climate response. But every climate response has a design limit. A bridge is designed for load. A seawall is designed for waves. A hospital is designed for expected patient volume. A vineyard system is designed for the climate it learned to survive. Santorini's old vines learned to survive a dry island climate. But the new stress is not only dryness. It is low rainfall combined with hotter summers, repeated stress, land pressure, tourism demand, and water systems that must now do more work in the same season. That is why the mechanism cannot stop at weather. The atmosphere begins it, but the island distributes it. First, the rain does not refill the soil. This is the quiet stage. There is no dramatic image yet. A winter can look simply disappointing. A spring can look just a little dry. People can still walk through white villages. Hotels can still take bookings. The sea can still shine. But beneath the surface, the ground starts the year with less stored water. Then heat increases the withdrawal. Heat is not only a temperature on a screen. For a plant, heat is a demand signal. Warmer air can pull more moisture from leaves and soil. The vine must manage transpiration, the process by which water moves from the root, through the plant, and out through tiny openings in the leaves. Transpiration helps cool the plant and supports growth, but it also spends water. When the air is hot and dry, the plant faces a difficult choice: keep the leaf openings active and lose more water, or close them and slow the processes that help build fruit. The vine begins making decisions without a brain. It closes, it slows, it protects itself, it gives less to the grape. That is how drought enters quality and yield. It does not simply strike the vine like lightning. It changes the plant's daily budget. Every hour of heat becomes a withdrawal. Every missing rain becomes a smaller deposit. Every dry wind becomes a pressure on the leaf. The grape is the place where those accounts become visible. The mechanism begins above the island. It moves through the air. It enters volcanic soil. It reaches the root zone. It moves into the vine's water budget. Then it appears in smaller berries, weaker clusters, stressed canopies, lower yield, higher prices, and finally the image of an old vine that did not make it. But Santorini adds another layer. The island's old vineyards are often described as dry farmed. That phrase can sound like they need no water, but dry farming does not mean water is irrelevant. It means the system relies on water that arrives naturally and is stored within the landscape. Dry farming is a bet on timing, soil behavior, root depth, humidity, and careful management. It is not a refusal of water. It is a reliance on water before the irrigation pipe. When that natural storage weakens, the old bargain changes. The vine still needs water. The difference is that the water is no longer arriving reliably in the old way. That is the turning point. A traditional dry farmed system can become dependent on engineered adaptation, not because tradition failed, but because the environment around tradition has shifted. The old system was adapted to scarcity. The new problem is scarcity without recovery. Scarcity without recovery is different from a dry year. A dry year can be endured if the next season replenishes the reserve. Repeated dry years change the base condition. They ask the vine to begin the next season tired. They ask the farmer to make decisions before the plant has recovered. They ask the winery to plan around uncertainty. They ask the water system to become part of an agricultural strategy that once depended more heavily on the sky. This is where the mechanism reaches infrastructure. Reuters reported that Santorini winemakers are testing adaptation methods, including treated wastewater irrigation, new planting patterns, subsurface irrigation, trellising, and atmospheric water harvesting. Each method is a response to the same problem. How do you get usable water to the vine while losing less of it to heat, air, and inefficient delivery? Subsurface irrigation answers by hiding water below the surface. Instead of spraying or applying water where sun and wind can steal it quickly, the system sends water closer to the root zone. The goal is not just to add water. The goal is to reduce loss before the plant can use it. Trellising answers in another way. It changes the shape of the vine so irrigation can be managed more efficiently. But that comes with a cultural and visual cost, because the Kulora basket is not just a farming technique. It is part of Santorini's identity. When the vine shape changes, the island's agricultural image begins changing with it. Planting in rows answers the same problem from the standpoint of delivery. Scattered traditional vines can be harder to irrigate efficiently. Rows allow pipes, sensors, and controlled systems to work with less waste. But rows also signal a shift from inherited pattern to engineered pattern. The vineyard begins to look less like a memory and more like an adaptation machine. Treated wastewater answers the question from the supply side. Water from homes and hotels, after proper treatment, can become a resource instead of only waste. In a dry island system, this idea is powerful. It means the water used by the tourist economy might partly return to the landscape rather than vanish from the agricultural story. But it also requires trust, standards, treatment, pipes, monitoring, and management. It requires the public to accept that wastewater, once cleaned properly, can help keep vines alive. Desalination answers supply in a different way. It takes seawater and removes salt to make usable water. On islands, that can be essential. But desalination is not free water. It requires energy. It requires equipment. It requires maintenance. It requires distribution. EEA Grants has described electricity needs for desalination plants as a major challenge on Greek islands, and Santorini has expanded desalination units because of tourism development. That means every additional liter can carry an energy shadow, so the mechanism does not end at the root. It runs into the grid. From the atmosphere into the soil, from the soil into the vine, from the vine into the harvest, from the harvest into the winery, from the winery into adaptation, from adaptation into desalination, wastewater treatment, pumps, sensors, electricity, and planning. By the time the mechanism becomes visible, the system is no longer only biological. It is mechanical, financial, and political. This is not just a drought. This is a tourism water fuse inside a dry farmed island. The word fuse matters because drought provides the dry material, but water demand determines how quickly the stress spreads through decisions. When the island is full, water demand rises. When the weather is hot, evaporation and human use both rise. When the vineyard is stressed, growers look for water solutions. When desalination expands, energy demand becomes part of water security. When wastewater reuse becomes necessary, treatment infrastructure becomes part of vineyard survival. Nothing stays in one category. A grape becomes a water question. A hotel becomes a wastewater source. A desalination plant becomes an energy question. A farmer becomes an infrastructure customer. A vineyard tradition becomes an engineering problem. A drought monitor becomes an economic warning. That is the hidden machinery of the crisis. Consider the vine itself. Its roots are not simply tubes, they are its memory of place. Older vines often survive difficult conditions because their root systems have had time to explore the soil. They can sometimes reach moisture, younger plants cannot. That is one reason old vines are valued. They carry resilience in their architecture. But deep resilience is not invincibility. If the broader moisture reserve is depleted repeatedly, the advantage of age can shrink. A 90-year-old vine may have endured storms, dry spells, heat, pruning, wind, poor soil, and decades of human history. But it cannot draw water from a reserve that has not been refilled. It cannot outgrow a climate trajectory overnight. It cannot negotiate with a hotel district for more winter rain. The old vine becomes a witness. And witnesses are important because they tell us where the mechanism has arrived. When the vine dies, the drought has already passed through the natural storage system. When the harvest collapses, the drought has already passed through the vine's growth cycle. When grape prices rise, the drought has already passed through the market. When growers test wastewater and subsurface irrigation, the drought has already passed into infrastructure. When desalination becomes central, the drought has already passed into energy planning. This is how a climate signal becomes a system signal. The mechanism is not a single line. It is a chain of conversions. Weather becomes soil stress. Soil stress becomes plant stress. Plant stress becomes agricultural loss. Agricultural loss becomes economic pressure. Economic pressure becomes adaptation demand. Adaptation demand becomes water infrastructure. Water infrastructure becomes energy load. Energy load becomes cost and vulnerability. Cost and vulnerability become political choices about what to protect first. That is why Santorini is such a sharp case. The island compresses the chain into a small space. The vineyards, hotels, desalination plants, wastewater systems, roads, ports, residents, and visitors are all close enough to affect one another. A large mainland region can sometimes hide these connections across distance. A small island cannot. On an island, every hidden mechanism eventually has an address. The atmosphere does not ask whether water is needed for grapes, showers, or kitchens. It simply withholds rain. The island then has to decide how to allocate the consequences. That decision becomes more difficult because tourism is not outside the system. It is one of the system's main engines. Tourism brings income. It supports jobs. It fills restaurants. It funds businesses. It creates demand for the very wine the drought is reducing. It also increases water demand during the dry season. That is not a moral contradiction. It is an operational contradiction. The same economy that benefits from the island's beauty can intensify pressure on the island's capacity to keep producing that beauty. That is why the mechanism has to be followed all the way down. If we stop at climate, we miss demand. If we stop at tourism, we miss drought. If we stop at technology, we miss energy. If we stop at tradition, we miss adaptation. If we stop at one dead vine, we miss the chain that killed it. The mechanism begins above Santorini, but it does not stay above Santorini. It falls short as rain that does not arrive. It becomes soil moisture that is not there. It becomes a root searching a smaller reserve. It becomes a leaf closing to conserve water. It becomes fruit that does not fill. It becomes a farmer with fewer kilograms to sell. It becomes a winery paying more for less. It becomes a water manager asked to make the island function. It becomes a treatment plant asked to turn waste into survival. It becomes a desalination plant drawing electricity to create supply. It becomes a question the island cannot avoid. What is water for first? That is the operational core. Drinking water comes first. Public health comes first. But after that, the choices get harder. How much water protects agriculture? How much supports tourism? How much preserves landscape? How much is spent on comfort? How much is recovered through reuse? How much energy can be committed to desalination? How much land remains in cultivation when development offers faster money than vines? The mechanism does not answer those questions. It creates them. And that is why the next stage of the story cannot remain in the vineyard as an object. It has to enter a person. Because a mechanism only becomes real when it changes someone's body, labor, income, or decision. The body does not experience drought as a graph. A farmer does not experience the combined drought indicator as colored pixels. A worker does not experience desalination demand as a planning document. A winemaker does not experience agricultural stress as a scientific category. They experience it as a morning walk through a vineyard that should be alive. As soil that does not release enough moisture. As a harvest that comes in too light. As a tank that will not fill. As a bill that still arrives. As a choice between preserving tradition and changing the shape of the vine to survive. The mechanism begins in the atmosphere. But the next place it enters is a human life. The drought becomes real when a person has to make a decision before the sun is fully up. Picture a grower walking into a Santorini vineyard in the early morning. Before the cliff towns fill with visitors, and before the hotel terraces begin another day of service. The air is not yet at its harshest. The light is still low. From a distance, the vineyard, low basket vines against volcanic ground, old trunks twisted by decades of wind, a landscape that seems too stubborn to fail. But the farmer is not looking at the view. He is looking at the space between expectation and fruit. This is where the mechanism leaves the dashboard. It is no longer a colored drought indicator, no longer a line in a Reuters report, no longer an 80% fall in production. It is a hand reaching into a vine basket and finding fewer clusters than the season promised. It is a leaf that should have carried strength, but now curls under stress. It is a trunk that has lived through decades of dry summers and still cannot negotiate with a ground that has not been refilled. The body does not experience climate change as a graph. It experiences it as a morning when the work is the same, but the vineyard gives back less. The farmer bends down because Santorini's old vines grow close to the soil. The Kulura basket is low, protective, and difficult. It asks the worker to meet the plant at ground level. There is no easy distance between the human body and the stressed landscape. Knees, back, hands, eyes, and breath all enter the same space as the vine. This is not agriculture from a drone image. It is agriculture at arm's length. And the first human pathway is labor. Drought changes labor before it changes the label on a bottle. A dry season can mean more walking, more checking, more pruning decisions, more uncertainty about which clusters are worth saving, more conversations with wineries, more worry about whether the harvest will cover the cost of the year. Heat compresses the working day. Tasks that once could be spread across more hours begin to crowd into cooler windows. The body starts negotiating with the climate just as the vine does. The vine closes its leaves to conserve water. The worker changes his schedule to conserve strength. Both are adapting to load. But adaptation has limits. If the grower expected a normal harvest and the land returns only a fraction, the damage enters the household as income. Fewer kilograms mean fewer sales. Fewer sales mean less money to pay for labor, tools, maintenance, fuel, family needs, debt, repairs, and the next season. A vineyard is not just a beautiful inheritance. It is an account book that must still balance. The land may be ancient, but the bills are current. That is the part hidden behind the romantic image of old vines. A 90-year-old vine carries history, but it also carries cost. It needs tending. It needs skilled hands. It needs the field kept in production. It needs a farmer who believes the next season is worth staying for. When that belief weakens, the drought has moved beyond biology. It has entered the decision to continue, and this is where the damage becomes dangerous. A dead vine is visible. A farmer leaving the vineyard is quieter. A family deciding not to invest another year may not appear on a drought map. A young worker choosing tourism wages over agricultural uncertainty may not be counted as a climate impact. A small plot becoming attractive for development may look like a land market decision, not a water crisis. But every one of those choices can move through the system, from atmosphere into soil, from soil into vine, from vine into income, from income into family decisions, from family decisions into land use, from land use into the future of the island. That is the human pathway. The farmer looks at the vine and sees more than fruit. He sees whether a way of working still makes sense. The tourist sees an island. The winery sees supply. The restaurant sees bottles. The local government sees infrastructure demand. But the farmer sees the conversion point where climate becomes livelihood. And that conversion point is becoming harder to protect. According to Reuters reporting, Santorini winemakers have been trying to adapt to heat and drought with methods such as treated wastewater, subsurface irrigation, and changes in vineyard structure. Those words sound technical until they land in the farmer's day. Treated wastewater means trust in treatment systems. Subsurface irrigation means pipes, layout, costs, maintenance, and a changed relationship with a vineyard that may have been dry farmed for generations. New training systems may mean changing the old basket form that helped define the island's agricultural identity. For the farmer, adaptation is not a slogan. It is a choice with a price. If he keeps the old method, he may preserve tradition while the climate moves outside the old range. If he changes the method, he may protect production while altering the vineyard's visual and cultural language. If he invests, he needs confidence the vineyard will survive. If he does not invest, the next dry season may take more. If he sells or stops farming, the island loses more than grapes. It loses a working piece of memory. This is why the human pathway cannot be separated from the tourism pathway. Tourism does not only demand water, it also changes the farmer's options. A person working in agriculture sees a nearby economy that may offer faster cash, more predictable seasonal work, or higher land values. Hotels, restaurants, rentals, and services are not abstract competitors. They are part of the same island economy. When water becomes scarce and grape production falls, the pressure to leave farming can rise. Not because farmers do not love the land, but because love does not pay every invoice. The drought is outside. The decision is inside the household. That is how a climate mechanism becomes a social mechanism. Imagine the farmer after the morning inspection. He returns from the vineyard with dust on his shoes and a number in his mind. Not the official number from Europe, not the island visitor count. His number is smaller and more personal. How many vines look weak? How many clusters will make it? How many kilograms might sell? How much he may earn? How much he can afford to spend on adaptation? How much time remains before harvest? How many more seasons an old plot can survive? This number decides dinner conversations. It decides whether a family repairs equipment. It decides whether a son or daughter sees a future in cultivation. It decides whether the vineyard remains a vineyard. And when enough families make that decision, the island changes shape. The body experiences drought as fatigue, but the community experiences drought as attrition. One plot at a time, one harvest at a time, one worker at a time, one adaptation cost at a time. It does not have to arrive as a dramatic collapse. It can arrive as a slow thinning. Fewer cultivated acres, fewer growers, fewer old vines, fewer young people willing to learn the work, more land pressure from tourism, more wine identity supported by less agricultural reality underneath. The event is visible outside. The damage begins inside decisions. The pathway then moves from the farmer to the winery. A winery can survive a short crop once. It can adjust. It can ration. It can pay more. It can focus on premium bottles. It can explain scarcity to buyers. But if scarcity repeats, the winery begins to live differently. It may compete harder for grapes. It may carry higher costs. It may hesitate to expand. It may search for alternative sources. It may sell fewer bottles into markets that expected continuity. It may depend on vineyard adaptation that farmers cannot afford alone. The winery is not only buying grapes, it is buying the survival of a landscape. That is a heavy burden for a business that must still operate in the present. Tourists may still arrive expecting tastings. Restaurants may still want wine lists. Export customers may still want allocation. The island brand may still promise a volcanic wine experience. But the field may be saying something else. The vineyard may be telling the winery that the future cannot be built on old assumptions. This is not just a drought. This is a tourism water fuse inside a dry farmed island. Because at the same time the farmer needs adaptation, the island's water system is serving millions of visitor days. The same season that heats the soil also fills rooms. The same period that dries leaves also increases showers, laundry, food service, cleaning, and pools. The same island that asks old vines to endure also asks desalination plants, wastewater treatment, and distribution networks to carry a larger human load. For a worker in tourism, this is not simple either. Consider the person cleaning hotel rooms in the afternoon. She may not own a vineyard. She may not decide water policy. She is simply doing necessary work. Sheets must be washed. Bathrooms must be cleaned. Guests expect service. The job depends on tourism, and tourism depends on the island remaining attractive. But the water running through that job belongs to the same island system that farmers are watching with worry. This is the painful overlap. The hotel worker and the farmer may both depend on tourism. The farmer may sell wine to visitors. The winery may rely on tourist tastings. The island may need tourism revenue to fund public services. But the water demand that supports that economy can also tighten the margin around agriculture during drought. There is no clean villain in this pathway. There is a load, and people are standing inside it from different sides. That is why the story has to stay precise. It is not true to say one shower kills one vine. It is not true to say every tourist is responsible for the drought. It is not true to say agriculture can survive unchanged if tourism simply behaves better. The evidence does not support a simple accusation. The warning is stronger than that. When a dry farmed island enters a hotter and drier pattern, and when seasonal visitor demand rises through the same months, the water system becomes the place where separate choices meet. The farmer's income, the hotel worker's job, the winery's supply, the visitor's comfort, the resident's tap, and the old vine's survival all become part of one question: how much margin is left? That question enters the farmer's body as stress. It enters the worker's body as heat and labor. It enters the winemaker's body as sleepless calculation. It enters the resident's body as concern that the island may be serving two populations at once, one permanent and one seasonal, both needing water, only one of them counted by residency. The body carries what the spreadsheet separates. A farmer does not say, "Today I experienced a combined drought indicator." He says the vine is weak. The soil is dry. The harvest is small. The price is high, but the volume is low. The future is uncertain. A hotel worker does not say, "Today I participated in seasonal water demand." She says the rooms are full, the laundry is constant, the heat is heavy, and the island is crowded. A resident does not say, "Today I observed the intersection of tourism pressure and desalination dependence." He says the island feels stretched. Those sentences are not scientific, but they are evidence of lived load. And the load is cumulative. If the farmer has one bad year, he may continue. If he has 2 or 3, the decision becomes harder. If adaptation requires capital, he needs help. If water reuse requires public trust, the community needs confidence. If tourism keeps growing without water limits, the margin keeps narrowing. If old vines die faster than new systems can protect them, the island loses something that cannot be replaced on a human schedule. A 90-year-old vine cannot be replanted in time for next summer. That is the fact that gives the human pathway its weight. Some losses are not just financial, they are temporal. They are losses of time. When an old vine dies, the island does not only lose a plant. It loses 90 years of rooting, training, pruning, surviving, and cultural continuity. A hotel can renovate in a season. A vine cannot become 90 years old by investment alone. The farmer knows this. That is why he does not look at the dead vine the way an outsider does. An outsider may see a symbol. The farmer sees a clock that stopped. He sees years that cannot be ordered, imported, manufactured, or rushed. He sees the difference between replacing a product and replacing a living system. The human pathway ends where the infrastructure pathway begins. Because once the grower understands that old reserves may not be enough, the next question is not emotional, it is operational. Where will water come from? How will it be delivered? Who pays for it? Which vineyards receive it? What happens if desalination depends on energy during peak season? What happens if treated wastewater becomes necessary, but pipes, treatment capacity, or public trust are not ready? The farmer's field becomes an infrastructure question, and that is the next weak point. Not the whole island, not the entire climate, not even the vineyard as a symbol. The weak point is smaller, more technical, and more dangerous because it can hide behind normal service. It is the margin inside the water system. The weak point is not the whole island. That is the mistake people make when they talk about a water crisis. They imagine a vast breakdown, An island without taps. A landscape without options. A total collapse so large that no one could miss it. But systems usually do not fail everywhere at once. They fail first at a smaller place, a narrow place, a margin where normal service depends on everything arriving in the right order. On Santorini, the weak point is the water system margin. Not water in the poetic sense, not water as a symbol. Water as production capacity, water as desalination units, water as energy, water as tanks, water as treatment quality, water as pipes, water as pumps, water as pressure, water as timing, water as the distance between what the island can reliably supply and what the island is asked to carry during a hot, dry, crowded season. That margin is where the fuse sits. According to EEA grants reporting on water management in Greece, securing drinking water is one of the important problems for insular Greece, and Santorini is an illustrative example because desalination units expanded there as tourism development increased demand. That is the official language. It sounds calm, but inside it is the operational warning. If desalination expanded because tourism grew, then the island's modern water security is already tied to a system that must keep producing water under seasonal pressure. Desalination is powerful. It can turn seawater into usable water. For an island, that can be the difference between chronic shortage and daily function. But desalination is not a miracle outside the rest of the system. It is a machine inside the system. It needs electricity. It needs intake infrastructure. It needs membranes. It needs skilled operation. It needs maintenance. It needs storage. It needs distribution. It creates water, but it also creates dependence. That is the hidden weakness. When people say, just desalinate more, they may be imagining water without a chain. But desalinated water travels through a chain before it reaches a tap, a hotel, a kitchen, or a vineyard adaptation project. Seawater must be taken in. Salt must be removed. Energy must be supplied. Equipment must keep working. Clean water must be stored. Pipes must carry it. Pressure must hold. Bills must be paid. Waste brine must be managed. And the system must do all of that, not during a theoretical average day, but during the days when the island is hottest and most crowded. The weak point is not the whole system. The weak point is the margin between peak demand and reliable production. In a quiet month, that margin may look comfortable. Permanent residents use water. Businesses operate. The system produces and distributes. Repairs may be scheduled. Storage can recover. Demand has rhythm. But the island does not live only in quiet months. Santorini has a resident island and a tourist island layered on the same pipes. The resident island needs water every day of the year. The tourist island arrives in waves, and during the warm season, those waves carry rooms, laundry, restaurants, pools, showers, cleaning, ferry traffic, cruise movement, and seasonal labor. The pipe does not care whether water is for a resident or a visitor. The pump does not care whether a liter goes into a kitchen, a hotel bathroom, a vineyard tank, or a restaurant sink. The margin cares. That is why tourism water demand becomes a fuse. It does not have to be the only cause of drought. It does not have to explain every dead vine. It does not have to be the full fire. A fuse only has to connect pressure to vulnerability. On Santorini, tourism demand connects the dry season to the water system at the very moment when vines are losing natural moisture and growers are searching for adaptation options. The old vineyard system survived by needing little engineered water. That was its strength. The vines were dry farmed. The couloura baskets protected fruit from wind and sun. The volcanic landscape held a tradition that knew scarcity. But drought has changed the question. If winter rainfall is too weak, if heat is too strong, if the soil reserve is too thin, then a system built around natural moisture begins to need engineered help. And engineered help must pass through the weak point. A grower cannot irrigate with hope. A winery cannot adapt with a press release. A pilot project cannot run on intention. Water must move. It must come from somewhere. It must be treated, produced, blended, pumped, measured, and delivered. That is why the future of a vine can suddenly depend on a treatment plant, a pump station, a sensor, an underground tank, a desalination unit, a power supply, and a maintenance schedule. This is the sentence that should change how the island is seen. A 90-year-old vine may now depend on infrastructure that did not exist when it was planted. That is not failure. It is a sign of transition. But transitions are dangerous when they arrive under stress. If a vineyard slowly modernizes over decades, the island can plan around it. If drought forces adaptation, while tourism demand is peaking, the system has less time to learn. Every new dependency arrives at the same crowded door. The European Union CAP network has described smart drip irrigation for Santorini vineyards, using recycled wastewater and desalinated water, with soil moisture sensors, automated systems, and water savings of about 30% per hectare. That is important because it shows adaptation is not imaginary. There are real techniques, real pilots, and real possibilities. Treated wastewater can become a resource. Desalinated water can be used more precisely. Sensors can reduce waste. Drip systems can put water closer to the root, instead of letting heat and wind steal it first. But this is where the weak point becomes sharper. A smart irrigation system is only as strong as the systems behind it. If wastewater is reused, the treatment plant matters. If desalinated water is blended in, desalination capacity matters. If sensors guide irrigation, power and maintenance matter. If underground tanks store water, storage design matters. If drip lines deliver water, clogging, pressure, filtration, and repair matter. If vineyards depend on scheduled delivery, governance matters. If the public is asked to accept recycled water, trust matters. Technology does not remove the weak point, it relocates it. The old weak point was the sky. Did rain arrive? Did the soil store enough? Did the vine survive the summer? The new weak point is partly engineered. Did the plant operate? Did the power hold? Did the treated water meet standards? Did the pipes deliver? Did the farmer receive enough water at the right time? Did the system have capacity when hotels were full? The map shows vineyards, but the weak point may be a pump. The headline shows drought, but the weak point may be electricity. The tourist sees a glass of wine, but the weak point may be a treatment tank miles away from the tasting room. This is how system risk becomes visible only after it has already spread. Think about the desalination margin during peak season. On a hot day, hotel demand rises. Laundry rises. Cleaning rises. Restaurants use water continuously. Pools lose water through evaporation and need maintenance. Residents still need normal supply. Workers still need housing and sanitation. At the same time, the agricultural system may be entering a period when vines cannot rely on the old moisture reserve. Adaptation projects may require controlled water delivery. If desalination plants are producing near their practical limit, any disruption matters more. A mechanical fault matters more. A power interruption matters more. A delayed maintenance window matters more. A pipe leak matters more. A treatment bottleneck matters more. A planning error matters more. The danger is not only the load, it is the reduced tolerance for surprise. Infrastructure is built with assumptions. It assumes a certain range of demand. It assumes maintenance can happen. It assumes parts can be replaced. It assumes peak periods are manageable because they do not last too long or because recovery periods follow. But climate stress changes those assumptions. Tourism growth changes them again. Vineyard adaptation changes them again. The same water system that once served residents and visitors may now be asked to serve climate adaptation for agriculture. That is a different system, even if the pipes look the same. The weak point also has a social side. Who receives water first when every use can make a moral claim? Drinking water has priority. Public health has priority. But after that, the argument becomes harder. Tourism supports jobs. Agriculture preserves heritage and local production. Residents need affordability. Hotels need reliability. Wineries need grapes. Workers need income. The island needs tax revenue. The landscape needs protection from overdevelopment. The old vines need time. Water allocation becomes a story about identity. What is Santorini for? That question sounds philosophical, but inside a drought it becomes practical. If the island is primarily a destination, then water systems may be expanded to keep the visitor economy smooth. If the island is also a working agricultural landscape, then some water, land, and infrastructure must be reserved for production systems that do not generate revenue as quickly as luxury rooms. If the island wants both, the margin must be protected before the dry season arrives, not during the emergency, because infrastructure cannot be improvised at the speed of heat. A desalination plant cannot be willed into operation because a vineyard is stressed. A wastewater reuse network cannot be trusted if standards, monitoring, and public communication are rushed. A drip irrigation system cannot save old vines if water delivery arrives after the critical window. A farmer cannot redesign a vineyard overnight. A treatment plant cannot become agricultural infrastructure without planning. The clock matters. The vine's clock is seasonal. The infrastructure clock is capital intensive. The tourism clock is immediate. These clocks are not synchronized. A visitor books a trip for next month. A hotel fills a season. A water plant may take years to plan, fund, build, and maintain. A vine takes decades to become old. A drought can expose all of these mismatched clocks in one summer. That is why the weak point is not only physical capacity, it is timing capacity. Does the system have time to recover? Does it have time to build? Does it have time to treat water safely? Does it have time to route that water where it is needed? Does it have time to protect vineyards before a generation of vines is lost? Does it have time to decide limits before demand decides for it? The event is visible outside. The damage begins inside the schedule. Reuters reported that Santorini winemakers are testing treated wastewater, subsurface irrigation, different planting patterns, and atmospheric water harvesting to adapt to heat and drought. Each of these is a doorway, but every doorway opens into more infrastructure. Treated wastewater opens into treatment standards and distribution. Subsurface irrigation opens into design and maintenance. New planting patterns open into land reorganization. Atmospheric water harvesting opens into energy, equipment, and scale. These are not bad options. They are necessary options, but necessary options still need capacity. A weak point does not mean the island is helpless. It means the island must know where pressure concentrates. If the weak point is desalination, energy demand, then renewable power, storage, efficiency, and maintenance become water policy. If the weak point is wastewater reuse, then treatment quality, monitoring, and public trust become vineyard policy. If the weak point is distribution, then pipes and pressure become agricultural adaptation. If the weak point is peak demand, then tourism management becomes drought planning. If the weak point is land conversion, then zoning becomes water resilience. Nothing stays in one department. That is the operational truth of Santorini. The vineyard cannot be saved only by viticulture. The water system cannot be managed only by engineering. Tourism cannot be planned only by arrivals. Climate adaptation cannot be reduced to one pilot project. The island is small enough that every solution touches another system. And that is what makes the weak point so dangerous. It can hide behind success. If hotels remain full, the system appears strong. If taps still run, the system appears strong. If tourists still post sunset photographs, the system appears strong. If wineries still pour tastings, the system appears strong. If desalination keeps producing, the system appears strong. But a system can function while losing margin. A system can look normal while using up its recovery time. A system can deliver service today while becoming more vulnerable tomorrow. The weak point is not always the place where the lights are off. Sometimes it is the place where the lights are still on because everything is working too hard. That is the Santorini warning. The island is not simply choosing between vines and tourists. It is choosing whether the water system can be designed for both without sacrificing the recovery margin that keeps old systems alive. It is choosing whether wastewater becomes a serious circular resource or remains a pilot at the edge of emergency. It is choosing whether desalination is powered and managed as a resilient backbone or treated as an endless tap. It is choosing whether tourism demand is planned around water reality or allowed to arrive as if the island were larger than it is. The weak point is small, but the consequences are wide. If the water margin weakens, vineyards adapt more slowly. If vineyards adapt more slowly, harvests remain unstable. If harvests remain unstable, grape prices stay high. If prices stay high, wineries consolidate pressure on fewer growers. If growers lose confidence, cultivated land shrinks. If cultivated land shrinks, the landscape becomes more vulnerable to development. If the landscape changes, the island loses part of the very identity that tourism sells. A pipe can become a cultural fault line. A pump can become a vineyard decision. A treatment plant can become the difference between adaptation and abandonment. That is why the weak point matters more than the postcard. The postcard shows Santorini as a fixed image: blue domes, white walls, dark volcanic cliffs, a glass of Assyrtiko catching the light. But the operating island is not fixed. It is moving water through machines, people, rules, seasons, and trade-offs. It is trying to keep an old agricultural system alive inside a new climate and a mass tourism economy. It is trying to serve two islands at once: the resident island, the visitor island, the vineyard island beneath them both. And if the margin fails, it will not first look like the end of Santorini. It may look smaller: a delayed irrigation project, a lost old vine, a more expensive kilogram of grapes, a farmer who stops cultivating, a treatment plant asked to do more, a desalination unit running harder, a summer where recovery does not come. The weak point is not dramatic because it is technical, but technical does not mean minor. Technical is where the future becomes possible or impossible. So before this story can move outward into the wider Mediterranean pattern, it needs proof that this kind of mechanism has already left marks in Greece. Not prophecy, evidence. A place where drought, demand, heat, and water supply did not remain theoretical. A place where the hidden margin became visible. That place is not Santorini. It is a reservoir on the mainland, and when the water fell, history came back into view. This is not speculation. A version of this mechanism has already left evidence behind. It did not appear first on Santorini. It appeared on the mainland, in a reservoir built to make a modern city feel secure. In 2024, severe drought lowered Lake Mournos in central Greece until the remains of the old village of Kallio came back into view. According to Reuters, Kallio had been submerged nearly 45 years earlier, when the artificial lake was created to help supply water to Athens. Then the water fell. Buildings that were supposed to stay underwater became visible again. A village returned not because history wanted to be remembered, but because the reservoir had lost enough of its margin to uncover it. That is what drought does when it reaches infrastructure. It turns hidden capacity into visible evidence. Lake Mournos is not Santorini. It is not a dry farmed vineyard. It is not a tourist island with basket vines, volcanic soil, and hotel water demand stacked against agricultural stress. It is a mainland reservoir. It was built for a different system, a different scale, and a different purpose. But the mechanism is related. Low rainfall, heat, demand, stored water falling. Infrastructure that once looked stable becoming a live warning. The precedent matters because it proves that water stress in Greece is not only a future model, it has already changed what people can see. A reservoir is supposed to hide the old village beneath it. That is part of its function. It stores water so the present can operate over the submerged past. But when drought drops the waterline far enough, the past rises into the present. Walls appear, foundations appear. The shape of a former settlement returns. A water supply system becomes a historical cross-section. It is difficult to imagine a clearer warning. The water did not issue a speech. It revealed a village. Reuters reported that Lake Mournos supplies water to nearly half of Greece's population. It also reported that satellite images from the National Observatory of Athens showed the lake's surface area shrinking from around 16.8 square kilometers in August 2022 to around 12 square kilometers in 2024. Those numbers are not small movements on a chart. They represent shoreline retreat, exposed mud, drying edges, and a reservoir losing the buffer that a major population center depends on. The Associated Press also reported that Lake Mournos, the biggest of the 4 reservoirs supplying drinking water to Athens, had fallen to its lowest level in 16 years. That is the kind of sentence that sounds technical until it is placed beside a city. Athens is not a remote hamlet. It is a capital region, a dense human system, a place where water demand is daily, non-negotiable, and massive. When a major reservoir approaches historic lows, the issue is not just water depth, it is confidence. Can the system keep serving households? Can it keep serving businesses? Can it keep serving hospitals, schools, kitchens, public buildings, and tourism? Can it manage another dry winter? Can it stretch reserves without pretending that the past climate still applies? The waterline becomes a public question. This is where the precedent connects to Santorini. The visible scene is different. At Lake Mournos, the image is a sunken village rising from a shrinking reservoir. On Santorini, the image is an old vine dying in a dry vineyard. One is water, retreating from concrete and stone. The other is moisture, disappearing from volcanic soil and rootstock. But both images are produced by a system losing stored water before demand disappears. The headline is different. The mechanism rhymes. In both cases, the first danger is not the dramatic picture. The first danger is the margin that disappeared before the picture arrived. Callio did not reappear on the first hot day. A 90-year-old vine does not die the first time the sun is harsh. The damage accumulates. A winter does not refill enough. A summer pulls too hard. Another dry period follows. The system spends down what it had stored. Then one day, the evidence becomes visible. The visible number makes the headline. The hidden number writes the damage. At Lake Mournos, the hidden number was stored water. How much remained, how fast it was falling, how long it could supply the region if dry conditions continued, how much reserve existed before emergency options had to be activated. At Santorini, the hidden number is seasonal water demand against dry season recovery. How much the island must produce when it is most crowded. How much natural moisture remains in the soil. How much treated wastewater or desalinated water can be used for adaptation. How much energy is required to keep the water system operating. The forms differ. The warning is shared. Both stories show that water stress is rarely only about the amount of water in a single place. It is about timing, storage, demand, and confidence in the assumptions behind the system. A reservoir assumes enough inflow to refill. A dry farmed vineyard assumes enough seasonal moisture to carry vines into summer. A tourism island assumes water systems can scale with visitors. A city assumes reservoirs can provide a buffer between weather and daily life. Drought attacks the buffer. That is why the Mournos precedent should not be used as a cheap prediction. It does not mean Santorini will become Athens. It does not mean every Greek island will face the same path. It does not mean one village resurfacing proves the exact future of one vineyard. The warning does not need that kind of exaggeration. The evidence is already enough. A major Greek reservoir lost enough water to reveal a village that had been submerged for decades. That is not a metaphor invented for a documentary. It happened. And because it happened, it gives us a boundary around the Santorini story. We do not have to claim that tourism alone causes drought. We do not have to claim that every vine death has one cause. We do not have to claim that one island's wine crisis is the same as a capital region's reservoir stress. What we can say is more precise. Greece has already seen drought, heat, and demand expose the hidden weakness of a water supply system. Santorini is now showing a related stress in a smaller, sharper, more compressed form. The scale is smaller. The margin may be tighter. That is the important difference. A mainland reservoir can store vast volumes. It can be connected to multiple sources. It can be supported by regional planning, emergency transfers, and a national capital's political attention. Even then, drought can make the submerged past visible. A small island has fewer hiding places. Its water system is closer to its tourist load. Its agricultural land is closer to its real estate pressure. Its desalination units are closer to its energy constraints. Its wastewater reuse options are closer to public trust. Its old vineyards are closer to irreversible loss. A mainland reservoir can show stress by exposing ruins. An island vineyard can show stress by losing living time. That is the key contrast. Callao was already gone as a village before it reappeared. Its re-emergence revealed the falling waterline. Santorini's old vines are not ruins yet. They are still living infrastructure. They still produce. They still protect a working landscape. They still connect farming families to a culture that visitors come to experience. But if the water margin weakens for too long, living infrastructure can become heritage scenery. The island may still talk about old vines after many of them are gone. That would be a different kind of resurfacing. Not stone emerging from water, memory emerging after the system has failed to keep it alive. The precedent also shows how water risk becomes public only after it becomes visual. Reservoir managers may know levels are falling before the public reacts. Drought monitors may show warning signs before a crisis has a famous image. Scientists may measure precipitation deficits and soil moisture stress before a politician holds a press conference. But many people do not feel urgency until they can see the old village, the exposed shoreline, the dead vine, the empty harvest, the rising price. This delay is dangerous. Systems need decisions before the symbol arrives. By the time Callao was visible, the reservoir had already lost water. By the time a 90-year-old vine dies, the root zone has already been stressed. By the time grape prices surge, scarcity has already entered the market. By the time desalination becomes the obvious answer, the island may already be dependent on an energy-intensive solution. By the time wastewater reuse becomes urgent, treatment, pipes, trust, and governance may still need years of work. The precedent teaches timing. Do not wait for the most cinematic evidence. The most cinematic evidence is often late evidence. There is also a human precedent inside Lake Mornos. Callao was once a real village. People lived there before the reservoir was created. Homes, a church, a school, and everyday life was sacrificed for the larger promise of water security. That history matters because it reminds us that water infrastructure always contains choices about whose landscape serves whose demand. The reservoir was built to supply a city. A village was submerged for that system to work. Now drought has revealed the trade-off again. On Santorini, the trade-off is different, but the structure is familiar. What landscape serves what demand? Do vineyards serve the wine economy? The tourist identity, the farmers, the soil, and the local culture? Do hotels and seasonal visitors serve the island's income while increasing pressure on its water system? Does desalination serve growth while adding energy dependence? Does wastewater reuse serve adaptation if the public trusts it and the system is built well? Every water decision contains a map of priorities. Drought makes that map harder to hide. This is not just a drought. This is a tourism water fuse inside a dry-farmed island. The Mornos case also shows that water systems can look large and still be vulnerable to repeated dry periods. A reservoir is designed to smooth variability. That is its point. It stores wet periods, so dry periods are less dangerous. But if the wet periods do not recharge enough, storage becomes a countdown. The same principle applies to Santorini's dry-farmed vineyards. Old vines and traditional methods smooth variability. They help the plant survive difficult seasons. But if the difficult seasons come too often, and the recovery periods weaken, even resilience becomes a countdown. This is the lesson that has not been absorbed deeply enough. Resilience is not permanent if the load keeps rising. A reservoir can be resilient and still drop. A vine can be resilient and still die. A community can be experienced with scarcity and still be overwhelmed by a new combination of climate, demand, and infrastructure limits. The fact that a system survived the past does not prove it is built for the future. It only proves it was adapted to the range it knew. Santorini's old vines knew hardship. They may not know this new overlap: heat and low rainfall, tourist demand in the dry season, desalination as a backbone, wastewater reuse as a future resource, energy as water security, land pressure from an economy that can convert agricultural ground into faster revenue. A famous grape whose scarcity raises prices but also signals risk. A cultural landscape that needs living roots, not only marketing. The precedent from Lake Mornos does not say collapse is inevitable. It says hidden margins can become visible, and when they do, the evidence can be unforgettable. A village under a reservoir, a dead vine in a basket, a shoreline retreating, a harvest shrinking, a price rising, a water system adding sources that once seemed secondary. These are not separate images. They are how a dry pattern announces itself through human systems. The past event gives Santorini a warning with boundaries. Do not overclaim. Do not pretend one mechanism explains everything. Do not say a tourist shower is the same as a dry winter. Do not say a reservoir near Athens and a vineyard on Santorini are identical. But do not dismiss the pattern because the places differ. The pattern is that water systems built around older assumptions are being asked to operate under hotter, drier, more demanding conditions. The pattern is that recovery windows are narrowing. The pattern is that stored water, whether in a reservoir or in soil, is becoming more politically and economically important. The pattern is that the damage becomes visible only after the hidden reserve has already been spent. That is the historical precedent, not a prophecy, a mirror. And when the mirror is turned back towards Santorini, the island looks different. The dead vine is no longer just a sad agricultural image. It is part of a Greek water story, already visible in reservoirs, villages, islands, and official drought maps. The grape collapse is no longer only a wine market shock. It is a sign that dry farming, tourism, desalination, land use, and climate are converging. The question now is not whether Santorini has ever handled dryness before. It has. The question is whether an island built around old water assumptions can keep its living heritage alive when the new load arrives faster than recovery. That question does not stop at Santorini. It moves across the Mediterranean. The Santorini story does not stay on Santorini. That is why it matters. If this were only a local vineyard crisis, it would still be painful. A famous grape would be under stress. Old vines would be dying. Farmers would be forced to adapt. Wineries would pay more for less fruit. A small island would face a hard agricultural future. But the pattern is larger than one grape, one island, or one dry season. Santorini is a compressed version of a Mediterranean system problem. The system pattern is this. Heat is rising in the same region where summer tourism peaks. Drought is tightening in the same months when water demand becomes most intense. Agriculture needs recovery in the same season when visitor economies need service. Desalination becomes more important in the same period, when electricity demand can also rise. Wastewater becomes a possible resource in the same society that must learn to trust it. Land becomes more valuable for buildings in the same places where farming needs protection. This is not only a vineyard crisis, it is a calendar failure. The old calendar assumed sequence. Rain comes first, soil refills, vines wake, summer stresses them, harvest arrives, tourism rises, systems work hard. Then the season passes and recovery begins. That was the rhythm behind many coastal and island economies. It did not mean every year was easy. It meant hardship had a place in the calendar, and recovery had a place after it. The new pattern weakens that separation. Drought does not wait politely for tourism to slow down. Heat does not avoid the harvest window. Water demand does not pause because soil moisture is low. Desalination does not become free because vineyards need help. A hotel season does not shrink automatically because old vines need recovery. The result is not one disaster. The result is overlap. and overlap is where systems lose margin. According to the European Environment Agency, drought has already affected large parts of the European Union, and in recent monitoring, hundreds of thousands of square kilometers were exposed to below-average soil moisture. The agency has also warned that vegetation productivity in parts of southeastern Europe and Mediterranean regions did not recover to the baseline in many areas. That matters because it shows a shift from event to condition. It is one thing for land to dry out. It is another for land to fail to recover. Recovery is the quiet variable. Most headlines focus on the peak, the hottest day, the lowest reservoir, the dead vine, the failed harvest, the highest price. But systems are often decided by what happens after the peak. Does the soil refill? Does the reservoir rise? Does the grid cool down? Does the hospital clear patients? Does the farmer earn enough to continue? Does the water system rebuild storage before the next wave of demand? The future will not be decided only by the peak number. It will be decided by recovery time. That is why Santorini's old vines carry such weight. They are not just plants. They are biological records of past recovery. A 90-year-old vine survived because the system around it allowed survival across decades. Rainfall, soil, pruning, labor, market demand, land use, and tradition all formed a long chain of continuity. If that chain now breaks faster than it can repair itself, the death of one vine becomes more than an agricultural loss. It becomes evidence that recovery time is being shortened. This is not just a drought. This is a tourism water fuse inside a dry-farmed island. The phrase applies beyond Santorini because many Mediterranean places are built around the same seasonal contradiction. The warm season is when visitors arrive. The warm season is when water demand rises. The warm season is when heat increases evaporation. The warm season is when crops are vulnerable. The warm season is when power demand can rise for cooling. The warm season is when fires become more likely in dry landscapes. The warm season is when the system is most visible and most fragile at the same time. A destination can look alive while running on a narrowing margin. That is the Mediterranean pattern, not one place collapsing. Not every island facing the same future. Not every vineyard doomed. The pattern is more careful and more important. Systems built around past climate assumptions are now being asked to operate in a hotter, drier, more crowded, more energy-dependent present. The old baseline still appears in the design of infrastructure, the timing of agriculture, the expectations of visitors, and the business models of local economies. The new baseline appears in drought monitors, water prices, desalination expansion, vegetation stress, and adaptation projects that once would have looked unnecessary. The island shows the shift because it has nowhere to hide the overlap. On a large mainland, water stress can be spread across basins, reservoirs, transfers, regions, and politics. On an island, the map is smaller. The pipe is closer to the hotel. The vineyard is closer to the development pressure. The desalination plant is closer to the grid. The wastewater stream is closer to the question of reuse. The visitor economy is closer to the resident water supply. The old vine is closer to the decision about whether land remains agricultural. The system pattern becomes visible because distance cannot absorb it. That is why Santorini should not be treated only as a wine story. It is also a land use story, a water story, an energy story, a tourism story, a cultural heritage story, a climate adaptation story. When the grape harvest falls, the effect moves through all of them. If grape prices rise, wineries may pay more. If wineries pay more, wine becomes more expensive, or production becomes smaller. If production becomes smaller, the island's wine identity becomes harder to maintain. If farmers lose confidence, cultivated land can shrink. If land leaves farming, development pressure can grow. If development grows, water demand can grow again. That is a loop. A dry season stresses the vineyard. A stressed vineyard weakens farming. Weakened farming opens space for a more tourism-heavy land economy. A more tourism-heavy land economy increases seasonal water demand. Higher water demand tightens the margin during future dry seasons. The loop does not need to be sudden to be dangerous. It only needs to continue. This is where the idea of a new baseline becomes unavoidable. A baseline is what a system expects before it starts planning. It is the normal range used to design pipes, roads, harvest expectations, water storage, staffing, emergency plans, electricity demand, and investment. If the baseline changes but planning does not, the system becomes surprised by conditions that are no longer rare. That is what climate risk often looks like in practice. Not a world where nothing works. A world where yesterday's normal planning keeps meeting tomorrow's normal stress. For Santorini, the old baseline said dry farming was harsh but possible. The old baseline said winter and spring could provide enough moisture often enough for old vines to endure. The old baseline said tourism could grow because engineered systems could expand around it. The old baseline said desalination could make water supply more reliable. The old baseline said wastewater was mostly a waste stream, not a vineyard survival tool. The old baseline said old vines were difficult but durable. The new baseline is asking harder questions. What if dry farming needs strategic support? What if winter rain is not enough often enough? What if tourism growth consumes the water margin that adaptation needs? What if desalination makes the island more dependent on energy at the same time heat raises cooling demand? What if wastewater treatment becomes central to agriculture? What if the vineyard landscape is no longer automatically self-preserving? What if heritage needs infrastructure? That last question is the one Santorini forces into the open. Heritage needs infrastructure. An old vine may look like the opposite of modern engineering. It looks ancient, rooted, shaped by hand, resistant to the speed of modern life. But in a hotter and drier system, that old vine may need sensors, treated water, drip lines, energy planning, wastewater standards, land use rules, and tourism limits. Its survival may depend on things that do not appear in the postcard. The postcard shows tradition. The system must now build support around tradition. This is not a betrayal of heritage. It may be the only way to keep heritage alive, but it also changes the meaning of preservation. Preservation is no longer simply not touching the old system. Preservation may mean changing the surrounding infrastructure, so the old system still has a climate in which it can function. A vine basket can remain visually traditional, while the water system behind it becomes radically modern. A winery can pour a wine with ancient roots while depending on treated wastewater and desalinated supply. A tourist can taste continuity without seeing the technology required to protect it. That is the hidden future. And it is not only about Santorini. Across Mediterranean regions, agriculture and tourism often depend on the same attractive climate that climate change is destabilizing. Warmth brings visitors. Dryness creates beauty and outdoor activity. Clear skies support the image of summer, but when warmth becomes extreme heat, when dryness becomes drought, when outdoor comfort becomes health risk, and when water demand rises against weaker supply, the asset becomes a stressor. The thing that sells the destination can begin to test the destination. This is the inversion. For decades, sun and dryness were part of the Mediterranean promise. They shaped tourism campaigns, seasonal calendars, architecture, beaches, outdoor dining, and cultural imagination. But there is a threshold where sun becomes heat load, dryness becomes water insecurity, and seasonal success becomes infrastructure strain. The same summer that fills rooms can empty reserves. The same weather that attracts visitors can damage crops. The same image that drives income can hide the cost of maintaining it. That is why system expansion must include tourism planning. Tourism cannot be treated as a visitor count alone. It is water demand. It is wastewater generation. It is energy demand. It is labor demand. It is transport demand. It is land conversion pressure. It is public service load. It is also income, jobs, business survival, and local opportunity. Any serious analysis has to hold both truths. Tourism helps the island live. Tourism can also intensify the island's water stress. The danger is not tourism itself. The danger is unmanaged peak load on a shrinking water margin. This distinction matters because blaming one group is easy and useless. A tourist is not a drought. A hotel is not the atmosphere. A pool is not the whole water crisis. But when many normal uses are concentrated in the dry season, and when the climate reduces natural recovery, the aggregate becomes a risk. Systems fail from totals, not from moral narratives. The question is not whether visitors should exist. The question is what the island can carry without spending down the future it sells. That question moves through infrastructure. Are desalination plants powered in a resilient way? Is there enough storage? Are pipes efficient? Is leakage controlled? Is wastewater treated to a standard that allows safe reuse? Can agriculture receive water in a targeted way rather than fighting for emergency supply? Are hotels incentivized to reduce demand? Are pools, landscaping, laundry, and cleaning managed as part of water planning? Is cruise pressure aligned with local capacity? Is land use protecting vineyard areas before development makes recovery impossible? Those questions are not glamorous. They are the future. A new baseline does not only require new technology, it requires new honesty about limits. The old preparation calendar may no longer work if it assumes that winter recovery will always arrive on schedule. The old infrastructure calendar may no longer work if projects move slowly while drought years stack quickly. The old tourism calendar may no longer work if peak arrivals coincide with peak water stress. The old agricultural calendar may no longer work if vines enter summer already weakened. The calendar itself is now under pressure. This is not only a drought. It is a calendar failure, an infrastructure test, and a compound risk signal. A compound risk is when several pressures combine so that the result is more dangerous than each pressure alone. Santorini shows that clearly. Drought alone stresses vines. Tourism alone stresses water systems. Heat alone stresses people and plants. Desalination alone increases energy dependence. Land pressure alone challenges agriculture. But together, they create a configuration in which the old answers may not be enough. More desalination may help drinking water, but if it depends on strained energy, it creates another vulnerability. More irrigation may help vines, but if water sources are not secure, it creates competition. More tourism may bring income, but if water demand grows without limits, it narrows adaptation space. More technology may reduce waste, but if trust and maintenance fail, it cannot carry the burden. More expensive grapes may reward farmers, but if yields stay too low, income still may not stabilize. Every solution has a shadow. That does not mean the future is hopeless. It means the future is managerial, political, technical, and cultural all at once. Santorini can adapt. The existence of smart drip irrigation, treated wastewater experiments, subsurface irrigation, atmospheric water harvesting, and vineyard redesign shows that people are not standing still. The European Union CAP network has described projects that reduced water use per hectare by around 30%, using smart drip irrigation with recycled wastewater and desalinated water. That is a real sign of possibility. But possibility is not the same as scale. A pilot can prove a method. A system has to make it reliable. A project can save water per hectare. A landscape has to decide how many hectares remain. A vineyard can adapt its irrigation. An island has to adapt its water politics. A winery can invest in technology. A community has to decide whether the future of wine is worth protecting as infrastructure, not just as branding. That is the next layer of the pattern. Agriculture is often treated as private land, private labor, private risk. But climate adaptation is revealing that some agricultural landscapes perform public functions. Santorini's vineyards are not only producing grapes, they preserve open land, they maintain cultural identity, they support tourism appeal, they create local products, they hold soil and memory, they help distinguish the island from a generic luxury destination. If those vineyards disappear, the island does not simply lose an industry. It loses a form of landscape infrastructure. And landscape infrastructure can fail quietly, not with a blackout, not with sirens, not with a single bridge collapse. It fails when fields are abandoned, when old vines die, when land converts, when young workers leave, when production falls below continuity, when the story survives longer than the system that made it true. That is the future echo. A place can keep selling the image of resilience after resilience has become too expensive to maintain. Santorini is not there yet. That matters. The island still has growers, wineries, adaptation projects, attention, and a powerful identity. But the warning is that the future will not be decided by nostalgia. It will be decided by margins. Water margin, energy margin, soil moisture margin, farmer income margin, land use margin, public trust margin, recovery margin. If those margins are protected, the old vines have a path. If they are ignored, the island may keep the symbol while losing the living system. The Mediterranean pattern, then, is not a single collapse spreading from island to island. It is a question repeating in different forms. Can a hot tourism economy coexist with stressed water systems? Can heritage agriculture survive when recovery windows shrink? Can desalination expand without creating new energy risk? Can wastewater be transformed from waste into resilience? Can planning move faster than drought? Can the calendar be rewritten before the next load arrives? This is where the evidence turns toward the final boundary, because the warning is serious, but it must remain precise. Santorini's drought, tourism demand, old vines, desalination, and water adaptation belong in the same system, but they do not prove every claim people might want to make. They do not justify exaggeration. They do not turn one dead vine into a prophecy. They do not make tourism the only cause. They do not erase the role of heat, rainfall, soil, farming economics, or land use. The pattern is strong enough without overclaiming, and that is why the ending has to draw a line between what the evidence shows, what it suggests, and what it does not yet prove. Because the future will not be protected by panic. It will be protected by seeing the system clearly before the next dry season turns another hidden margin into visible damage. The warning does not need exaggeration. The evidence is already enough. Santorini does not need to be turned into a prophecy to be taken seriously. One dead 90-year-old vine does not prove that every old vine on the island will die. One reduced harvest does not prove the end of Santorini wine. One tourism season does not explain every drought signal. One hotel shower does not kill one vine. That kind of story would be simple, dramatic, and wrong. The real story is harder. And because it is harder, it matters more. What we know is this. According to Reuters reporting from Santorini, Assyrtiko grape production fell from about 2,500 metric tons in 2022 to about 500 metric tons last year. Winemakers described heat and low rainfall as part of the pressure. A 90-year-old Kulura vine had already died. Farmers and wineries are testing adaptation methods, including treated wastewater, subsurface irrigation, different planting patterns, and other ways to help vines survive a hotter and drier island. What we also know is that Santorini is not only an agricultural island, it is a tourism island. Municipal data lists a permanent population of about 15,550 people. Local officials have described annual visitor numbers in the millions. EEA Grants, reporting on water management in Greece, has described drinking water security as a major issue for islands, and has pointed to Santorini as an example where desalination expanded because of tourism development. Those facts belong in the same frame, but they do not mean the same thing as a single cause. That is the evidence line. Drought is related, heat is related, low rainfall is related, soil moisture stress is related, tourism demand is related, desalination dependence is related, wastewater reuse is related, land pressure is related, vineyard economics is related, but relation is not the same as a clean, single chain where one actor causes one outcome in one step. The visible number makes the headline. The hidden number writes the damage. The visible number is the harvest collapse. The hidden number is the water margin underneath it. Not 1 liter, not one pool, not one visitor. The margin. The space between what the island can reliably provide and what the island is asked to carry when drought, heat, agriculture, residents, hotels, restaurants, laundry, pools, wastewater, desalination, and energy all arrive in the same season. That is the risk. It is not that tourism alone caused the drought. It did not. It is not that desalination is bad. It is not. On islands, desalination can be essential. It is not that wastewater reuse is dangerous by definition. Properly treated and monitored water can become a resource. It is not that old, dry-farmed vineyards were poorly designed. They were brilliantly adapted to a harsh place. The risk is that old adaptations and modern infrastructure are being pulled into a new load pattern. This is not just a drought. This is a tourism water fuse inside a dry-farmed island. A fuse is not the whole fire. It is the connection that lets pressure move. On Santorini, tourism water demand becomes a fuse because it rises in the warm season, when the island is already under dry season stress. The vineyard enters summer, needing the moisture that winter failed to fully restore. The hotel system enters summer, needing water for comfort, cleaning, kitchens, and service. The resident island still needs reliable supply. The desalination system must keep producing. The wastewater system becomes more important as a potential source for adaptation. The energy system becomes part of water security. The danger is the overlap. The danger is not only that the island is dry, the danger is that the dry season is also the demand season. The danger is not only that old vines are stressed. The danger is that saving them may require infrastructure that is itself under load. The danger is not only that grapes are scarce. The danger is that scarcity may push decisions about land, money, labor, and identity faster than the vines can recover. This is why the evidence boundary matters. If we overstate the case, we weaken it. If we say every dead vine is caused by tourism, we ignore climate and soil. If we say drought alone explains everything, we ignore demand and infrastructure. If we say technology will solve everything, we ignore energy, cost, maintenance, trust, and scale. If we say heritage will survive because it survived the past, we ignore the fact that the future is not offering the same conditions as the past. The truth is not smaller because it is careful. The truth is sharper. Santorini is showing what happens when a living heritage system meets a compound load. The old vine is not only a plant, it is time made visible. It is 90 years of rooting, pruning, wind, heat, survival, and work. It is a form of infrastructure that cannot be rebuilt quickly. If a pipe fails, it can sometimes be replaced. If a pump fails, parts can sometimes be ordered. If a hotel room needs renovation, it can be repaired in a season. But a 90-year-old vine cannot be manufactured by urgency. Time is the part no desalination plant can produce. That is why the ending of this story cannot be only about water volumes. It has to be about recovery. Can the island recover enough between dry seasons? Can the soil recover enough before the next summer? Can water systems recover enough capacity before the next visitor peak? Can farmers recover enough income before the next investment decision? Can old vines recover enough strength before the next heat wave? Can planning recover enough honesty before the next official drought signal appears? The future will not be decided only by rainfall. It will be decided by whether recovery time still exists. That was the warning from Lake Monos on the mainland, where drought lowered the reservoir until the old submerged village of Callio came back into view. The comparison is not exact, and it should not be treated as exact. A reservoir is not a vineyard. Athens is not Santorini. A sunken village is not a Kulura vine, but the evidence rhymes. In both places, a hidden water margin became visible after the system had already been spending down its reserve. At Lake Monos, the waterline revealed stone. On Santorini, drought is revealing root. One shows the past resurfacing from a reservoir. The other shows the future pressing into a vineyard. Both remind us that water systems usually give warnings before they break completely, but those warnings are often ignored because daily life still appears to continue. The tap still runs, the hotel still opens, the wine is still poured, the sunset still looks untouched, the system still performs normalcy. But normalcy can be expensive when it is purchased by shrinking margin. That is the final image to hold. A drought dashboard lights up in Europe. A small island enters another dry season. A farmer walks toward a basket vine that has survived for nearly a century. In the distance, hotels prepare rooms, laundry turns, restaurant kitchens open. Desalination plants keep producing. Visitors arrive with ordinary needs. Residents expect ordinary service. The winery waits for grapes. The soil waits for water that did not arrive in the old way. Nothing in that image is fake. That is why it is so dangerous. A fake crisis needs dramatic language. A real system warning can be quiet. It can look like a smaller harvest, a higher grape price, a dead vine, a new irrigation pilot, a water plant doing more work, a public debate about tourist numbers, a farmer delaying one more investment, a landscape that still looks beautiful while becoming harder to keep alive. The system does not always fail as a single crash. Sometimes it thins. It thins in the soil before it thins in the bottle. It thins in the farmer's confidence before it thins in the market. It thins in the water margin before it thins in the visitor experience. It thins in the recovery window before it becomes a disaster. That is the future echo. If Santorini protects the margin, the story can change. Treated wastewater can become part of a circular water system. Desalination can be managed as a resilient backbone instead of an endless excuse for growth. Smart drip irrigation can reduce waste. Vineyards can adapt without losing their identity completely. Tourism can be planned around carrying capacity instead of treated as a number that only moves upward. Residents, farmers, wineries, hotels, and water managers can begin from the same truth. The island is small, the margin is real, the vines need time. That is not despair. It is a plan waiting to become policy. But if the margin is ignored, the losses may arrive in a form that looks gradual until the culture underneath has changed. The island may still pour wine, but from fewer old vines. It may still sell vineyard heritage, but with less vineyard beneath it. It may still host millions, but with more energy spent turning seawater into basic service. It may still look like Santorini, while the systems that made Santorini distinct become harder to maintain. That is the warning at the evidence line. Do not exaggerate the crisis. Do not soften it either. Santorini's old vines are not dying because of one simple villain. They are being tested by a combination of heat, low rainfall, water demand, infrastructure dependence, land pressure, and a changing Mediterranean calendar. Tourism water demand is the fuse because it carries human demand into the dry season, right when the land has the least spare capacity. Drought is the fire risk. Water margin is the place where it spreads. The old vineyard is the evidence that time itself is now exposed. The event will pass. This season will become a record, then a comparison, then a memory. Some vines will survive, some will not. Some technologies will work, some will remain too small. Some visitors will never know the difference. Some farmers will carry the difference in every decision they make. But the thing the event revealed will remain. A system built around old assumptions is being tested by a world no longer following the old calendar. That is the final question Santorini leaves behind. Not only whether one grape can survive, not only whether one island can host millions, not only whether desalination can keep taps running. The deeper question is whether a place can keep its living heritage alive when the climate, the economy, and the water system all demand more from the same narrow margin. The future will not be decided by the postcard. It will be decided behind it. In the root zone, in the treatment plant, in the pump, in the visitor cap, in the winter rain, in the farmer's decision to stay, in the island's willingness to count not only arrivals and revenue, but recovery. Because the next drought may begin the same way this story began. Not with panic, with an official signal on a dashboard. And somewhere below it, a vine waiting to see whether the island still has enough time.